First of all, again, I want to thank everyone for coming. I am the founder and executive director of Rare Eye Design, and this has been a fun event for us to put together, and we're really looking forward to hearing from these fabulous panelists. So today's panel, what we're our goal is to break down stereotypes and dismantling misconceptions about accessibility and visibility with people with disabilities through the work they do, their advertising strategies, and inclusion efforts. This is also a safe space for asking questions. I know sometimes when you have questions about people with disabilities and things, sometimes people have them, but they are nervous or don't know how to approach the question. And we're really wanting you guys to ask it, because this is the opportunity with many of us in this community. I want to thank Employment Disability Resources. They are the sponsor for our food, so thank them for our grub. We have handouts on the tables that are just some marketing tips in promoting visibility and inclusivity of people with disabilities. There's also a QR code on there for when we are done taking a survey for us at Moderator Design to help us learn what your feedback is and see what we can improve on and what you gain from this. So now I'm going to pass the mic to our moderator for this event, Vicki. Oh, my aunt's gonna help me pass the mic.
Thank you, Kendra. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. I am thrilled to be the moderator and honored to be the moderator with these fabulous panelists. And we'll just start out with brief introductions, and then we'll dig into the questions. And then at the end, we'll take questions from the audience the last 10 minutes. All right, sound good? Okay. I'm Vicki Stewart. I'm Executive Director of Employment Disability Resources. We are a nonprofit, and we promote inclusion and employment for people with disabilities.
Hi, I'm Molly O'Connor, and I'm the Executive Director of Reach Literacy, a literacy nonprofit here in town. And I am in my free time an accessibility advocate, and I do a lot of design work and sort of like digital accessibility work. I'm Mary Spargur. I do a lot of things. I run a business where I employ adults with disabilities. I am the director of a gymnastics program that is an adapted gymnastics program. I'm a mom of a child with a disability. I'm pretty active in advocacy in a lot of different avenues.
Hi, I'm Maddie Peschong. I am a brand photographer and educator in Sioux Falls. So I work with businesses, local and nationwide, to get them photos for their marketing that they can use to hopefully make more money. And then I also teach photographers how they can do what I do and get their nights and weekends back, not having to shoot weddings, but to work with small businesses instead.
All right, first question. Can each of you share your personal journey and how you came to see the importance of accessibility and visibility for people with disabilities? And we'll go ahead and start with you, Mary.
Oh. Thanks for the heads up. So how did my journey start? I grew up without much. I grew up in a single mom household with siblings who really struggled. And I noticed at a very young age that people were treated differently. I didn't get the same treatment from friends, from staff, from school, the librarian, because I didn't have. I couldn't talk about how there was Disneyland or the cool shoes or any of it. And so people were treated, I wasn't a bad kid. I didn't do anything that showed that I wasn't worthy of the same exact care or attention as anyone else. And as I matured and grew and hit a higher level, high school, into college, that awareness changed and grew, because it wasn't just people who were poor. It was impacting so many other people in situations that they are still worthy to be at. And so I kind of catapulted into special education and advocacy in college, and now I'm here. Okay. Good job. Okay.
I grew up pretty naive to a lot of this world. As a pretty, basic white girl, I saw myself reflected in the world around me and the media, and so I was really naive. And then as I got older and my worldview expanded, I realized that other people didn't always have that same experience. As a photographer, I started noticing that, a lot of the photography that I would see from brands and in like the commercial space were maybe reflective of like me and my life, but not other people. And when I started working with a company out of LA, it's a pajama company called Little Sleepies, they were really passionate about making sure that they were showing inclusivity and diversity in their brand. And then that became something that like I really needed to champion when we were finding models and bringing in kids to work with to shoot this product. And so I took that really seriously, and that totally changed my brand and the way, while I do less of that type of work now, it definitely changed the way that I look at things. And even the brands that I follow and patronize, I notice inclusivity more and support those brands so I can see more of it. And then I also have a background in marketing, and as my understanding of marketing and business grew, I realized that if we as businesses are not making sure that we are speaking to our audience in a way that they can understand, not only does that, not maybe is that not the greatest thing to do as a human being, it's also bad for business. It's better for business if we are more inclusive.
So my journey began also when I was young. My dad had a disability. He had a car accident when he was in his youth, and he had to have his arm amputated. So I knew him my whole life like that, and watched him navigate the world differently than I did. And that was because the world wasn't built for him. And I could see that, but I internalized that differently as a child than I do today. I internalized it as a child like, well, that's on him to figure out, right? Like he needs to figure out how to navigate the world not built for him, not us figure it out the other way around. But as I got older and learned more about it, and then watched him he developed a rare disease that took his hearing. He became deaf toward the end of his life. I watched him navigate disability another time with a different kind of disability. And I had the wherewithal and the adult brain to understand it differently in different contexts. And as I watched him withdraw and not be able to participate like he liked to and like he used to be able to, I started to understand that the people who need to make the world more accessible are not the people with disabilities. It's all of us, right? Like it's my responsibility. And a light bulb went off in me, and I just went forward full force. I practiced design for 10 plus years before going over to reach literacy, where I am now. And so as a designer, especially, it was my responsibility. But then I really started learning about how to make my work more accessible, how to teach other people to make their work more accessible, and then to spread the message about how each of you can do that too.
All right, next we're going to touch on challenges and triumphs. What are some of the biggest challenges you see in your industry that are faced with accessibility and visibility for people with disabilities, and how have you worked to overcome them? We'll go ahead and start with Maddie on this one.
The first example that I think of is there's always been this kind of chatter in the photography community about making sure from more of the inclusive side, I want to say, making sure that like your portfolio, your website, the work that you're putting out there, that it includes all different types of people. And I think that a lot of the time photographers, and I'm sure this isn't unique to that community, get a little defensive to say like, well, but people who are using wheelchairs aren't hiring me, or people who aren't white aren't hiring me, or people who have bigger bodies aren't hiring me. And I think that it's important that we go out of our way to make sure that we're creating spaces where they feel safe to come into. And I think that that can look like a lot of different things, but not just, kind of relying on, well, if they're not hiring me, if they're not reaching out, then it's not my problem, right? Like we can still be inclusive, even if that's the case.
Right. So what are the biggest challenges? I have been in the special education world for 20 years. We're not counting. And I spent a lot of time in public schools and in private schools and in like tier 4 schools where we have not been successful in learning or being able to get educational services in a public school. And now we have to be in an outside placement and we're all kind of pushed out. And I left the education system and started doing advocacy work without all of the legal red tape, because though the laws and the legal red tape is all there for good, my heart is bigger than what the tape allows. And so the challenge is often that we are repeating ourselves as advocates or as people with disabilities. I don't fall into the category of a person with a disability in the context that we're talking, but I can be an advocate for somebody who can't advocate for themselves. I spent most of my years working with the population that have cognitive or intellectual disabilities and figuring out, what do they want? What is the family looking for? How are we doing this? And we're repeatedly saying the same things because that's business as usual. We can't do that. Sorry, here's the menu of what we provide. We can't do that. And so to kind of have the triumph, as the question asks, I left education so that way I could meet every child and family where they're at. And I do that in a lot of different ways and want to use the avenues that are there and build on them with situations like this where we can talk about it, to take those moments. It doesn't take much to employ an adult with disabilities. It doesn't take much. You just have to be kind. You just have to think outside the box for just 1 second. If you had to do the job the same way that your predecessor did the job, you would go bonkers because you want to do it in a way that works for you. Well, so do adults with disabilities that want employment. And I can't speak for the adults that can speak for themselves. That's not fair. But those adults that I work with that don't have a voice in this community want you to know that. They want you to know, and they are being heard in our community. The Sioux Falls community has really come together to help that. I'd love to see it more in situations like this.
Great. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about it from a digital accessibility standpoint because that is my area of expertise. I think that we've come a long way, even in the last 5 or 6 years. A good example of that, it's a small one, but it's close to my heart, are captions. In the past, that was a lot of work to get captions on your video. You had to maybe find a service to do it and pay for it, and now it's built into the places you're posting the things, like right there, right? And so you still have to do a little bit of work, but it's all laid out for you. And that is a huge, those little things that make it easier to build in accessibility, that alt text, all of those things, make a big difference. We still have to learn how to interact with it, but I'm really excited to see that every new thing that I see in that space. But we have a long way to go in the digital accessibility space, in the accessibility space in general. I think the biggest thing I see is that often when we build things, we create websites, we make a PDF, we do these things. We do them with only our knowledge. We don't involve people with disabilities. Sometimes we use the ADA as a metric and then kind of rely on that as the voice of somebody with a disability to say we did it right. I think the thing that I would like to see the most is just having people with disabilities in the conversation and in the process from the very first step, from the ideation phase, right? And because it's really hard to redo something, rebuild a website or redesign something after it's complete and you run it by somebody and it is inaccessible because you didn't know, because you don't live the same way or in the same world as maybe somebody with a disability. I think it's so important that we just open up the conversation and include more people, and also keeping in mind that one person with a disability doesn't represent all people with disabilities. So involving many people in the process and getting feedback along the way.
All right, and I'll just throw a statistic out. 1 in 4 adults in the U.S. has some type of disability, right? So they might be visible disabilities, or they might be those hidden or invisible disabilities, so it's a wide variety, and people with disabilities are actually the largest minority group in the world. So even if you in the audience maybe don't have a disability, chances are pretty likely that you will acquire one, maybe through accident or injury or disease. So just out of curiosity, how many in the audience have a friend, a coworker, or a relative with a disability? Raise your hands. So that's why this topic is so important, I think, for us to talk about. So the next question is, how has being involved in the disability space impacted your work and perception of accessibility and disability importance?
All right. So I think the biggest thing I've learned as I've worked in the accessibility space is that accessibility benefits everyone. It doesn't matter if you have a disability or not. You could have a temporary limitation, like your hands are full. You could have a temporary disability where your arm is broken, or you could have a permanent disability like my dad with an amputation. All 3 groups benefit from accessibility that benefits, somebody with permanent disability. It hurts nobody, it helps everybody, and it is absolutely the obvious choice. Now, it's expensive, and that is often the drawback, but if we build things accessibly the first time, I think in the long run, it's more cost effective. So I think that's been the most interesting thing that I've learned, and I think one of the best selling points of it too for people who aren't like, well, let's do it for the right reason. Well, let's do it because it's going to make everything better. It's going to make everything easier for everyone.
So I had said before, I've spent a lot of time in education and in that setting, and I wanted to step outside of that. And I needed to find people who have disabilities that can advocate in some fashion for themselves, where I can learn from what do people with disabilities want. I can make an assumption. Mom and dad are just learning what it is like to have a child with a disability, and there's overwhelm. And so I took it upon myself to make friends with people in the community who have disabilities, who've been fighting this battle for inclusion their whole life, and what it looks like for them, and to get their perspective of that, and then to take that and apply it to what I'm doing. So, for example, there is an adapted gymnastics program. What do we have to do to make it accessible for little kids? What would you have preferred when you were younger? What would you have been looking for? Though it looks different today than when we were younger, what should we be thinking about? Some of the children that I'm working with, many of the children that I'm working with can't tell us. They don't have the words or the understanding yet to say, well, if you would just stop making so much noise, I could do this. They can't say that yet. And they might not even be aware yet. So it's taking those little things from the people in the community who have lived these lives and have advocated for themselves, and adjusting it and making it impactful in a way that affects more than just that single disability or that single person, kind of helping everyone.
Yeah, I echo what both of these women are saying. It truly does benefit everyone. I think back to the Rare by Design campaign that we did about 1.5 years ago, and we got to spend the day at the studio having just a ton of people come in to get their photo taken, people with disabilities, and get to like just kind of be the star for a little bit. And the responses that I got, not just that day of seeing these people totally light up, getting to be the star of the show, but then the messages that I got after from parents and guardians saying, we saw the billboards, and like they get to see themselves on these big screens and these big billboards, and they get to see people who look like them and people who have disabilities and are thriving. Seeing the joy on someone's face and being able to like participate in that really just opens your eyes to like the smallest things that we can do that make a difference and make things more accessible.
So how can different stakeholders, employers, employees, policymakers, marketing agencies, city entities, and advocates collaborate to promote a more inclusive community? And I'll just open this up to any of you three.
This is going from something that Molly said earlier, but making sure that there are people, that there are stakeholders in the discussions from the get-go who are living this experience and not also relying on just one person. I think that we maybe have a tendency to do that, to say like, well, I know this one person and this is what they said, and that's a really good start, but that one person does not represent the full community. So the more that we can get more people in these rooms having these discussions, I think the better.
I agree with that as well, and I also know of a place called the Employment Disability Resource, a gal named Vicki who would be a great resource connecting you.
Thank you for that plug. Breaking barriers. What barriers to accessibility and visibility for people with disabilities still exist in your opinion? And how do you think they can be broken down?
What barriers don't still exist? I feel like they're everywhere. But in the world I live in, same world as you, my focus is often with little kids, or on the other end with the adults with disabilities who also have intellectual disabilities. And that's an area that I've educated myself in and spent a lot of time in. Run a business employing adults with disabilities, and in that arena, which I think applies to many arenas, there's resistance to change because it's different. These are changes we can make that don't cost tons of money. The building already has curb cutouts. The building already has an elevator and push buttons, and the seats are set up so they're 3 feet wide, and we've already done all of that. All we have to do is think outside the box and think, how can this person access this job? So it might be something like rolling silverware, or, people with disabilities are not the janitors of the world, but taking out the trash, cleaning off of the table, and just looking at the venue that we're sitting in. And the idea that people with disabilities, that's what they do. I saved them a spot at my organization and they can clean the table. So if you have a resume that comes in and they have a disability, you notice that in the interview, don't worry, we hire people with disabilities. They're over here, and they are the custodian of our organization. And how do we change that? We go right into a place that has accessible jobs. The job itself is accessible, but we make sure that the owner, the manager, the person that runs it knows this is actually an accessible job, and all we need to do is stop putting the cups on the top shelf, and then Vicki can stock them. It's something just like so simple that we all can do. And then admit, those people that are in those positions to admit, oh, there's another way to do this. Oh, that change, yep, we're gonna have to reorganize where we put some things. That change is simple.
that I will stop there. I love that. Yes. I think a barrier I see in all regard when dealing with the topic of disability is the misconceptions that come along with it, the otherness, the uncomfortability, not wanting to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. I think, first of all, you are going to say the wrong thing and you're going to do the wrong thing at least once, and that's okay. If you're there to learn and to do it right and you care about doing it right. So I think one of the biggest things we can do in breaking down that barrier is be vulnerable and be open to change and putting the cups on a different level, open to, whatever is needed, open to saying the thing that you think is right and hearing the feedback that you didn't do that right, like you could do a better job with that. And I think that would make all the world of difference in this space.
I'll jump in a little bit here. What I kind of see in the employment world is that people assume that people with disabilities only can work in entry-level positions, and that's just not true. And there are statistics that show that people with disabilities are not given promotions or the chance to advance, to develop, to go to trainings like other people so that they can climb that career ladder. And I think that's something that we really need to be aware of. And also, like Mary said, reasonable accommodations. Most reasonable accommodations cost nothing. And if there is a cost, it's usually $300 or under. So it's not going to be a huge cost to your business if you do hire people with disabilities. And a lot of times they bring their own accommodation ideas. They know what they need on the job and they're happy to share that with you. So it's all really about that open communication and that dialogue. Next question. Innovation and technology. How can technology be leveraged to create more inclusiveness for people with disabilities? Anybody want to take that?
So before I started doing photography full-time, I worked at an agency called ClickRain. And when we were putting together some videos years ago, we were adding captions and paying a lot of money to get these captions added. And you had to have someone like listen to the entire video and transcribe it, or you had to pay someone to do that. Like, it was a whole thing. And I think about that versus now when I get on Instagram stories and I swipe up and I click a button that says captions and it does it all for me. And yet there are still so many people not doing that. Mary knows how I feel about that. It's such a simple thing, and there's so much really cool technology available at our fingertips to be able to make it easier for people to engage with what we're creating. Not only is that good for people who need that accessibility, but it's good for everyone. I think there's some crazy statistic where like 85% of people, it's an extremely high number, listen to media like that with the sound turned off because they're nursing a baby, or because their husband's next to them and asleep, or because they're at the doctor's office. Like, there's a million reasons why someone could have the sound off. Use captions, use alt text, make sure that you're creating things that are accessible to different types of learners, whether that's adding captions or having a PDF option or whatever it might be. It's not just good for humans, it's better for business as a whole too.
I love the caption example. That's my favorite one. I don't like listening to sound, so I'm one of those people. I don't even have a reason. I just don't like it. I agree. And I think, so piggybacking off of that, I think AI I can see the huge advancements already in the accessibility space using it. And I think that is one, just automatically transcribing on the spot. You just have to push the button. You have to think ahead and say, okay, I need to make sure I put captions on this. Another one, this is just a small example, and I want to share it because I'm excited about it, and I just started doing it. This is not an absolute necessity to do, but I always put an image description when I post something on social media. Alt text is good. I like to go a little above and beyond because I am a designer and I want to really paint the picture of what the thing is. And in the past, I would take the photo, edit the photo, figure out what I wanted to say, I'm exhausted, I'm ready to post it, and I'm like, oh no, it's an image description. I have to figure out, I have to describe this. And that's, at that point, I'm like, done. But then I do it, and now I've started putting that image into ChatGPT, and I say, create an image description for accessibility for social media, and it doesn't work. So I think, there are a lot of examples like that. That one is a little bit more of a workaround, and soon it'll be built right into Instagram, and you don't even need to go over to ChatGPT to do that. But a lot of this can be done really simply compared to how even like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, it was done. So harness that AI if you can, use it to your advantage. You don't have to work as hard anymore to make things accessible.
Yeah.
Great. What does accessibility and visibility mean to you personally? And what is your challenge for attendees of this event?
I dropped the lid to my water bottle, and you can't set it down because it's like,
will not have that.
will you? Can you? Okay. Thanks. I didn't think about that when you dropped it. It doesn't, I don't know, it's like a bobblehead. So what does accessibility and visibility mean to me personally? A lot. I'm not a crier. We're not doing that. Okay, moving on. Accessibility is seeing everybody for who they are and knowing they're worth whatever that step is. They're worth it. Whatever they're bringing to the table, yeah, it's a pain in the butt. You had to move a chair so they could fit at the table. They're worth it. Yeah, it costs a few extra dollars to put in the button. I know the button broke. I know it costs extra money to have that fixed. They're worth it. I know it's a pain to test how many pounds it is to pull on the door, but if they can't get in, it's worth it so they have access. Everybody, they're worth it. That your worth is not determined by if you can get to that space. If there wasn't those things, we would have a bunch of women here that would not be able to be here. They're worth it. So when you're organizing, designing, building, planning, collaborating, and it's like, oh yeah, that's gonna cost, it has to be a line item in our budget. Accessibility has to be whatever that looks like and wherever you live and work, it has to be a line item in your budget. But it is, I guarantee it. Tell me a time it wasn't. It will be worth it because all of these people are worth it. I can't top that. That's spot on. I love that. I won't try to top it. It's not optional. That's I think my takeaway or the thing, my reflection on it. I challenge you to look at how you make things for other people, whether that's just a social media post that you do, or if you manage people or you make decisions for other people, look at how you're doing it and try to look at it from a different way. Would somebody with a disability, would they be able to work with these things that you're implementing, with these posts that you're posting? Are you blocking people out? Are you creating barriers? So just re-look at your world from a different lens, and you won't see all the things. It'll take time, and you'll continue discovering them, and you'll discover more the more you get to know people with disabilities and their worldview and their pain points. You'll never discover them all on your own, but try to go home and understand how you interact in the world and how you affect other people, and if you do it in an accessible way.
I think back to the way that I grew up and how I was, I lived in a world that was made for me and very easy for me to navigate. And that was luck, and there are people who are not that lucky, or maybe someday will not be that lucky, and it doesn't take a lot for us to be able to help them. And I think back to the Rare by Design shoot and just seeing like the impact that these people felt to be able to see themselves reflected and to be able to see like what a big deal they were. I think about that really often. And as far as a challenge, this is maybe a bit of levity. This is a safe space, right? I'm reminding everyone. So my 9-year-old son, so a 9-year-old boy, okay, he recently broke his wrist, and we went to a playground so he and his sisters could play, and he came home and he was just completely beside himself that they did not have accessible things for him to play on. Like, just could not believe that people with broken wrists can't play on these playgrounds. And I was like, well, you do have a broken wrist, so perhaps we shouldn't be playing on these playground pieces of equipment. But it started a really good conversation, even though I think it came from a selfish 9-year-old boy perspective, for sure. It started a good conversation with him to hopefully make him a bit less naive than I was as a kid, and help him realize that, hey, there are people out here who have disabilities that they will have for the rest of their lives, right? Not just for 6 weeks in a cast. And what can we do to help those people? And so I think that's a challenge for myself as well as for those of you in this room. Make sure that you're having these conversations, yes, at work, and yes, in your groups of friends and colleagues, but also with your families and with your kids. So we don't have to keep having discussions like this, right? Because it's already built into our society.
Sorry. In the middle, you just keep getting.
One challenge that I think I would like to offer all of you is to think about your workplace. Think about where you go to socialize. Think about meetings and conferences you go to. Are there people with disabilities even there? And if they're not there, why not? So let's make that effort and include everyone in all of those activities, because we really do need to be inclusive of all people with disabilities at every event. Finally, what support systems or resources have you found that have been most helpful to you?
I think the most important resources I've found are my friends and mentors who live with disabilities, and some are in the room here today. And just having, I can't speak to it from a first-hand perspective, and it's not my story to tell, but asking what can I do, or how can I share this. There are also resources nationally. There's advocates who have incredible books you could read. I mean, there's so many things I've found that have really spoken to me. So the resources that are out there. And then as a designer, that's been a little more tricky. I think as I was trained in college, accessibility was never mentioned. It was never even part of the conversation. So that has been a total self journey where I've had to educate myself. And there's been some great resources out there too. So if any of you design and you want to know about how to create a truly accessible PDF or something like that, I have a guy that I can connect you to, and you can learn about it that way as well. So I think both just locally and nationally, even some of these people that I will never meet have been incredible in my accessibility journey.
Yeah, ditto. Except not the PDF thing, I don't know a guy. Well, what support systems? Yeah. I know her guy now. Support systems. So my son is 11 and has autism, and people didn't believe that for a long time. So the support system sometimes is just people that listen, people that believe you, believe the struggle, as a person that's advocating and as the person who has the disability. Watching your own child navigate the world that is not created for them, and we are not crying today, is really challenging. Watching them become empowered to say what they need is life-changing. Quick story. He's 11, he's a genius. He knows all the dinosaur things. You want to talk science? He's got you. You think the moon is shrinking from the inside because there's no moisture? He knows about it. I don't understand any of it. Don't know. It's not a thing. You feel awkward in a social situation. What do? I just kind of get quiet. No, you act like an animal because you understand animals. A year ago today, he was laying on the floor while I was winning that award. Go find the video. Okay, so just the other day, we were at All-American Gymnastics, and he was playing in the gym with a bunch of kids he didn't know. And he has these facts rolling around in his head that he just can't help but tell you. And the girls are the same age as him. And they're like, why are you telling me that? Because 10, 11-year-olds, like, that's a real question. He was like, oh, you didn't know? That's my superpower. I did not teach him that. I taught him a lot of things. That was not, and they were like, what? Yeah, because people that have disabilities all also have other great things about them. And I have autism, but my superpower is I know all these things. And 3 of the girls were like, cool. But the one girl was like, oh yeah, I've heard that. And they continued to have a crazy conversation about things. But like, it was accepted. You could just say it, and that's like small potatoes, but it's really actually a huge deal. So surround yourself with people who listen, because that little girl did, and it made a huge difference to him.
Yeah, I think that there's so many people in this room that I have learned from and that have been really great resources. I mentioned your TED Talk when we sat down today, that I absolutely loved your TED Talk and I learned so much from it. And I believe it was your TED Talk where you said something about like, if you don't have a disability yet, chances are you will at some point. And that was, I hadn't heard it said like that before. And it was just so eye-opening. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all of the Instagram videos that Kendra sends me that cause me to think differently and think about things differently. So I'm very thankful for the people in this community who are doing this work because I've learned so much from all of you.
All right, I think we are going to wrap things up. Just a quick reminder, the surveys with the QR codes are on your table. Please fill those out. We appreciate your feedback very much. And we are going to be drawing for door prizes, and you must be present to win, so stick around to see if you're a winner. And we will be hanging out here for another hour, so please feel free to socialize and ask questions, have more discussion on this topic. But for now, we will open it up to questions from all of you. So if you have a question, just raise your hand, and you can ask for a specific person to answer, or just want to hear from everyone, or we'll chime in who we think wants to answer.
Okay. So I've been through an experience in the last 2 years with this building renovation that we've been doing downtown. And we took the time, like, we thought we were in the right hands, right? Like, you're working with an architect, you're working with a construction company, you just assume that they've got it, right? Like, it's gonna be ready to go, we're not gonna have to worry about anything when we open these doors, other than all the things you have to worry about. But my eyes were wide open, like almost immediately when the doors opened, with individuals coming in and saying, what about this and this and this, and it was met with a little bit of defense at first, because you've done all this work, you're so proud of the space and all of this, but there was clearly a lot of things we hadn't considered, and it was really eye-opening to hear those things, and it was an opportunity for us to reach out to some of you on the panel, but also just, yeah, like you said, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. How do we make this place inclusive to all? And in our minds, inclusivity might mean something completely different, like walks of life and different industries, whatever that looks like, but we hadn't considered that piece. And so since then, we've done work, we've made some adjustments, but there's still this, like, if it's not in front of you, you forget. And we're busy people, right? Like, we're going about our days, and I'm thinking about all the things in our space right now that have gone sideways, that we were intentional at one point, and now, like, the cups are back up on the shelves and they're not down, so I guess my question for you is, how do we continue to stay top of mind when you're busy? Like, do we have to write an SOP? Like, what do I need to do so I can forget to do these dang things? I don't.
Put something else on the top shelf. But yeah, I think standard operating procedures are a good place to start. Things that you can put on the top of your, like, every place has those meetings that could have been an email. And so when you have that meeting that could have been an email, always, it's not the tabled item. It's, okay, is there anything that we need to be addressing? Just like you're gonna make it a line item in your budget, accessibility, however that needs to be a line item in your budget, it needs to be on your agenda. Is there anything else right here? And whose action steps is it? I would, and build it part of your SOP.
I think, so at Lemonly, or Click Rain, I started a task force called DIVE, Designing Inclusive Visuals for Everyone, and that was kind of like the thing that I owned, and it was my responsibility to make sure that I was looking at all the things, and I had a team, so it wasn't just on me, but it kind of fell on me to make sure that that we're continuing to do the work correctly, and if we weren't, that I was able to identify, or somebody else would identify it and come to me and say, hey, I think this might need to be looked at. So I think having just somebody whose job it is, a side, heading a task force or something like that, does a lot of good. Just like having that line item, so they could speak to that line item every week or however often you have that meeting. You wanna?
Any other questions? I would also say that, involve people with disabilities, even different disabilities, because something that I might see as a wheelchair user, somebody who's blind might see something totally different than what I would, or what I would need for accessibility. So, and we always talk about the interactive process, especially with like reasonable accommodations. It's not a one and done. Oh, well, we gave them a lower desk. They should be fine forever. Well, we all change. We all have different needs as we go. And I think it's super important just to continue to have those conversations and not assume that just because we did it once, it's going to be good enough.
You made a good point too about like look around you. Are there people with disabilities at your events? Are there people with disabilities in our space? What are we doing wrong? Or who aren't we communicating with properly? So,
And how do we get people with disabilities in the architecture field?
Yes.
That's I think, oh my gosh, can you imagine the good that would do?
I saw a question there.
Sorry, this is a super basic question, but I appreciate the response. How are you defining disability? Where I'm coming from that is like, for instance, obviously we're much more aware of mental health and conditions along those lines currently. If these are personal, my dad's bipolar. Would he be classified as disabled within the definition of this room today, or? And where I'm going with that is, if that is part of it, is that helpful in a way? Does that make it more broadly aware? Does that ultimately maybe help with some of the progress going forward?
Yeah, I think it does. Excellent question. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, a person with a disability is anyone with a physical or intellectual disability that affects a major life activity. So walking, talking, breathing, sleeping, if you have challenges with any of those things, you would qualify as a person with a disability. So yes, mental health, everything is included when we're talking about disability. And so when you think about it that way too, I think a lot of people think of people who use wheelchairs. That's maybe the first thing that comes to mind, but there are so many different disabilities. And I think that's why we're the largest minority group, because it's such a wide variety.
I was just gonna piggyback off of that. Vicki still has a disability even though she has a wheelchair. I still have anxiety even though I take medication. They still fall into that category as well. So there will be people with invisible disabilities that fall into that, whether it is a mental health one or it's like POTS or some disability that you just pass out. Even when you're medicated, you still have a disability. Even when you have access to the mobility to any of the things that you would need, you still have the disability.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. Remember, it's a safe space. You're amongst friends. And again, feel free to stick around afterwards, and if you'd rather ask a question privately, we're around for that too.
Can we do the drawing?
Yeah.